Hi, everybody. Nicole Kirk here from Power Bespoke, Property Negotiator. Everybody just give me a thumbs up if our connection is good and if you can hear me. If you just pop a wave or hello or thumbs up, it'll be fantastic. I'm joined today by the lovely Nazia Gofur, Hello. Nazia is a residential solicitor with a multi-award-winning conveyancing team at AVrillo.
Thank you.
Yes. So Nazia, a little bit about Nazia. I do many transactions with Nazia and speak to her almost daily during this time. This very I didn't want to use the word unprecedented, but yes, these strange times. And we got Nazia today on the call, and she's actually open to questions and comments. So this is your opportunity. If you have any questions about should you be, what happens if you need to move now, what can you do to prepare? So throughout the call, pop your comments or questions in the box, and Georgie's in the background helping me, so we will address some questions at the end. But Nazia and I have chosen 3 topics for today, and we'll talk through them one by one. But firstly, Nazia, how long have you been with AVrillo?
Okay, so I've been with AVrillo coming up to 4 years now. So I've been with them for quite some time. I've worked myself up from sort of right from the beginning, worked my way and just kind of I guess I really enjoy what I do there. It's a great company to work for. Been there for 4 years and just really enjoy it. Yeah, thank you so much for asking.
And how would you describe these last 6 weeks?
Okay. Completely unprecedented, as you know. It's a really, really difficult time for everyone in the industry, all solicitors, all estate agents, anyone that's working in the housing market. Obviously, you've got to think about families as well, and what they're going through. So, countries obviously suffering quite brutally at the moment. It has been nothing less than difficult. It's just been, absolutely, I guess, just very unprecedented. But one thing that has come out of it, and you can see, is where we are working on transactions. People are a lot nicer to each other. They're kinder to each other. There's a lot of good faith, which is nice. And we're working with sort of people who, if they are going ahead, they're a lot more committed. They, working together, if you like. So that's quite nice to see.
It reminds me of something I saw on my daily walk that was stuck up on the side of a church. It said, as the world will ask to stay apart, we've come together. So I've seen a lot of that. And I think that sums it up quite well, and to exactly how you've explained it now.
Really
okay, so it does echo that. So we'll kick off with our first point of discussion. We are in, I think, is it week 6 of lockdown?
About week 6 of lockdown, yeah.
It's about week 6 now. And things have changed from, it seemed a little bit confusing in the beginning. Everybody seemed to be winging it. But this does seem to be a process of sorts now. So how have you seen things from the beginning of the restrictions? What has changed in terms of what you are able to do now with regards to moving, what lenders are looking at, and surveyors? So how has that now changed almost 6 weeks in?
I guess it's difficult because on a day-to-day things change quite a lot. We initially had guidance, and the guidance is quite limited in terms of what's come out from the Law Society, from regulators, from the government. At the moment, as it stands, the government's position is do not exchange unless you're exchanging completing on a vacant property, or you've explicitly made some provisions as to how you're going to be managing those risks. So, you know, it sounds quite straightforward, but actually, if you break that down, that's quite, you know, it's quite complicated. So, first of all, do not exchange unless you're exchanging on a vacant property. I guess that's quite self-explanatory. We're talking about, you know, properties that are new build, properties that might be probate, properties that are sort of, you know, power of attorney. They're your transactions that you can be working on. They're your transactions where people can still be exchanging. Then the second element of that, the clause, so where they're saying unless you made explicit provisions, this has kind of gone full circle. So initially we saw lawyers, conveyancers, who don't have experience in litigation, drafting clauses to go into a contract, to make these provisions, if you like. But then what kind of happened after that, you know, a lot of commentators have been talking about, well, you know, these things haven't been tried and tested. They've not been tested in courts. We don't really know how it's going to work if something goes wrong. We don't really know how it's going to fit in everyone else in the chain. So it's become actually quite difficult to put a clause in. The Law Society themselves, they haven't offered a clause for contracts. So it has kind of gone full circle. We did initially see lawyers play around with clauses, throw around clauses, but the position as it stands, I'm seeing about 80 to 85% of lawyers will probably try and do a simultaneous exchange completion. So they're moving away from clauses and preparing everything to happen on the same day instead.
And what has been the response to so for those on you know, watching this live now or maybe watching it later, so properties are able to exchange and complete simultaneously. This is pre-COVID as well. Nazia, could you explain about to us why a property would have pre-COVID chosen a simultaneous exchange and completion?
Yeah, absolutely. So pre-COVID, we did see them. They weren't as frequent as they are at the moment. You know, in terms of pre-COVID, you found that a lot of properties, you do the simultaneous exchanges and completions where there was an issue. For example, the buyer's funds, for example, might be an issue. The lenders might not have guaranteed that the funds will be in by a certain time, so you'd wait for these funds to come in before you do the simultaneous exchange and completion, or you'd wait for if the buyer's doing a remortgage, and it's a condition of that remortgage that it has to be done on the same day. The funds can't be used beforehand. That would be one of the reasons. You may also find sometimes, you know, there's maybe a tenant still in the property and that tenant's got to vacate. So they would be certain circumstances when they'd be done. Usually solicitors wouldn't do them often because there's quite a lot of work involved in simultaneous exchange and completion. There's quite a lot of preparatory work, and of course there's quite a lot of work for the clients themselves. There's a lot of cost involved. For example, removal costs, they would have all been booked up beforehand. They would have all been paid beforehand, and people don't want to really pay for those costs if they don't have a guarantee that an exchange has taken place. So they would be some of the reasons why they wouldn't have happened so often previously. But now we're talking about a situation where, you know, actually it seems like the safer thing to do. So yes, there is still the question for buyers to decide whether they want to pay for things like their removals. They need to decide whether they want to sort of, you know, spend that money, get everything ready in the meantime. But I am seeing that actually people are working on good faith a lot more. I know me and Nicole,
I was just going to say it requires a tremendous amount of good faith, but with the way things are and looking at the bigger picture globally, this does seem to be, you know, that everybody's working towards the same goal, and there seems to be a little bit more, I don't know if camaraderie is the right word, but it does feel like people are being, you know, talking a lot more and just taking that step back.
Yeah, I guess it does take an element of teamwork with everybody involved in the chain. It takes an element of, you know, people just being quite honest. And I know we had a conversation about a transaction where we said, you know, the seller had concerns about the buyer and their intentions and whether anything would happen. And it was just quite frankly having that conversation, saying, look, just be honest whether there's going to be a problem or whether you are going to be going ahead. And actually it all worked out fine. But, you know, I completely appreciate people will have these concerns about, you know, whether they should go and commit themselves to making these payments and bookings. But what's the alternative? The alternative is obviously a lot riskier.
Exactly, I agree. And that takes us nicely to our second point of discussion, which is, are there any wins during this COVID-19 time that you are very proud of to have been a part of?
Yeah, so obviously we had a transaction that went through yesterday, and I'm really pleased. And I know, Nicole, for you, it was a personal win. I know you've been working really hard, and I've heard the backstory in relation
I've got my tissues here. I'm still feeling the
emotion. But in terms of the transaction on our end, it went very quickly, but I understand sort of obviously it was a very emotional one for the client. In terms of this particular transaction, a lot of things were pre-organized by the client pre-COVID, which was obviously very, very handy in this situation. They had removals booked, and those removal companies still honored that booking. They were actually able to vacate the property prior to exchange and completion. So it was still a vacant property that was being exchanged on, and it kind of went through, but it did take a lot of, I would say,
is a good faith, because empathy, and good faith, because these clients, remember, Nazia, they are moving to Spain. Not right now immediately, but their removal is all linked to, I think their goods are near a port waiting for a ferry, you know, when that is allowed. And that's the extent of you know, of what we are dealing with right now, and decisions people are having to make. And I'm so glad that went through. You know, you see, so they had to pay for things and vacate the property, right?
Yeah, and all before they exchange. So it was all on the basis that their buyer is going to commit and pull through. And it took a lot of conversations between you and I, Nicole. I know a lot of conversations between the clients, a lot of conversations between the solicitors, to make sure that everyone was on board and up to scratch and still willing to kind of make that move and make it happen.
Well done. So I can say thank you. I can confidently say now you and I have both been invited to Spain, and we can have a drink there whenever we are allowed to. They're very pleased with us, by the way. Okay, so Nazia, so point number 3, discussion topic number 3. If I was a buyer or a seller in this market, and I say this market, I'm going to speak for the rest of 2020. What can I do if I'm a buyer or seller to prepare myself now for my purchase or sale?
Okay, so I guess with this, you've got to think about practicalities in terms of solicitors, in terms of estate agents. The whole industry is seeing people on reduced services, on skeleton services. So there will.
Well, can I just say on that point though, from the sale point, I'm doing. I've got a listing going live, so we're doing live listing. Online viewings, virtual viewings. So I know that many estate agents are shut and many aren't working, but we are. So I've no problem with that, listing properties and sales advice. So that is tick 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 for me from a a solicitor point of view, though, I would be looking at you for guidance as to what people can get ready.
Sure. So on a solicitor's kind of perspective, what my advice is, you find a solicitor who is able to get you to a certain point in the transaction. So with people being on skeleton services at the moment, you may find that things are inevitably going to be slower. But you want to be able to prepare yourself as much as possible. So if you do instruct a solicitor, find a solicitor who can get you to a certain point. AVrillo are quite advanced in terms of, I say quite advanced, they've got, you know, cutting edge technology which allows quite a lot to happen. So estate agents can instruct without any human intervention. We can get a sales pack out to the other side solicitors. We can get a client to fill out their property information forms, fixtures and fittings forms. They're really key documents that you want to get done beforehand. And a lot of those things, for example, property information form, if a client's had an extension done, any work's done to property, we want them to do things like get their building regulations and their planning permission documents all sorted, all ducks in a row, basically. So when you are back off that restriction, you know, those things can just be pushed through to the other side quite quickly. Now, for a buyer, you also want to be able to just order searches. You've got to bear in mind there's quite a lot of search companies as well who are actually taking quite a lot of time to turn things around. So we are seeing that searches where ordinarily would have taken 2 weeks, they're now taking 4 to 5 weeks to come back. So there is that inevitable delay. The other thing to factor is when lockdown is lifted, if everything does come back, you know, I'm being very optimistic, but so, you know, and I think we will see this boom. When this boom does come back, then you will have a lot of searches being ordered, you know, all at the same time. So ideally you want to be in that position where you have ordered your search and got yourself ahead in terms of putting order in, so yours is one of the first to come out the other side. So those are things that people can still be doing in the background, and, you know, just getting themselves prepared for a situation where, you know, when things are back to normal, when people are sort of back to work, then there is stuff there in the pipeline to be doing, in the pipeline to be working on.
That is a very good point. The last point about getting yourself ahead. There was an article read earlier today that said, unlike the 2008 recession, what's happening now is that people have been pent up and literally locked down, not able to go anywhere. So the minute that is lifted and people are able to physically view properties, they expect a surge of people. So asking estate agents of how they prepare. A question, please, Nazia. So in the past, I've worked with you where I've recommended clients to you from both, because AVrillo are able to act for the buyer and the seller in transactions. Is that still the case right now?
It is still the case. So yeah, we are allowed by the regulators to work on both sides of the transaction. Like I mentioned, in terms of getting the instruction in, it's fairly straightforward process in terms of and those initial steps, in terms of the client doing the property information form, fixtures and fittings form. It takes very little human intervention for us to even sort that out for a client.
Okay, so I hope everybody can still hear us. I have got one question through so far, so I'm going to read it out. It says, how is your team set up for the backlog of work once lockdown eases?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I think it's kind of like just with every service at the moment. I mean, we kind of touched on what surveyors are doing, what lenders are doing. It's going to be absolutely the same in terms of there will be work to be done. I think it really depends on how the industry comes back, how the market comes back. You know, is it going to be phased? Is it going to be everyone coming back at the same time? How's this lockdown going to be lifted? So I think it's kind of like a, you know, it's almost like things change on a day to day. So we're keeping a very close eye on sort of the situation. And like any business, any company at the moment, you are looking at things, quite carefully, making quite careful choices as to what you do. And when sort of we see those restrictions being lifted, as any company would do, you'd be responding and thinking about what staff you're going to be bringing back, or what staff you're going to need at that point to deal with it.
Well, I think proof is in the pudding for you. Yesterday, the 30th of April, in the middle of our lockdown, you got a simultaneous exchange and completion over the line. And I think that tells a story in itself. So I hope that answers whoever's posed that question. I hope that's okay for you. So Nazia, thank you so much, for your time, and we'll still be taking messages. If anybody's there who has a message right now, or if you're watching this later, pop your message through and I will get back to you. And then if there's any questions for Nazia, I'm happy to pass that on. But I couldn't have done the last few weeks without you, Nazia, personally, to get this through. And yes, I obviously I hope everything gets back to some type of normal very soon. But thanks for everything that you've done for us, me personally, and for us at Power Bespoke.
You're very welcome, and likewise, thank you very much, and thanks for having me.